Autism spectrum disorder, which is also known as ASD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder which affects more boys than girls. It's also a lifelong condition that affects the individuals throughout their lives. So symptoms include having trouble understanding others in terms of literal meaning when others have underlying feelings and the message behind someone's saying. Symptoms include having difficulties understanding others, whereas those individuals have trouble with social communication in ways where they might not understand the underlying meaning behind a literal message when someone tried to convey an idea or thought. Another common characteristic traits among individuals with autism spectrum disorder is where they say a word and they repeat it over and over again, either in their head in a high-pitched voice, or they might not say it verbally. They will just have that word repetition in their head. Those individuals have special interests, and it's very common among people on the spectrum. Those individuals share interests in a certain subject matter that they find interesting. Individuals prefer structured activities over spontaneous activities. In a way, they're organized and they prefer planning events ahead of time, which eases transitional anxiety for them. Some individuals have hypersensitivity, which is sensitive to stimuli, such as loud noises in a middle shopping mall, or bright lights that could send them to sensory overload. And those individuals also have restricted interests. Some individuals prefer talking about one subject and might have difficulties changing to a different subject, such as talking about cars. They might have difficulties moving from one subject to another. They might fixate specifically on cars, and that's their central focus in most, which the individuals repeats words in their head or saying it in a high pitched voice, that those words repeat itself in their head. They could be words that they don't necessarily understand. Social communication, those individuals in their social environment have interest in objects where they not only find different features in a room fascinating, they also have unique ways to use an object and the relationship between them and the object and how the individual manages to operate a certain machine. They have their own unique ways to use something. For example, individuals who have trouble with operating the mouse. For someone on the autism spectrum disorder, they have different techniques in their own unique ways to insert and use the mouse with extra padding and different ways to make machines work where you and I and others around them don't usually think in a way they think in their unique thinking process. And they also have social reciprocity difficulties in returning favors, and also those individuals, for example, saying please and thank you from an early age. Those individuals might need prompts to say something that we don't usually think about when we appreciate other people for helping us. There's usually a social reciprocity comes involved, and also with initiating and maintaining conversations. For those individuals, they might not be able to know what they would say if they were to start a conversation or expected to. And nonverbal delayed language, they have different means of communications. For individuals who are nonverbal, they use assistive technology, and they might be receptive communication might be their strength and how they communicate. They might use different ways to communicate that are through sign language, assistive technology, or just a different means of communication. They also have difficulties with social situations. They might not understand how to interpret what other people are saying to them, and they might not be able to understand the underlying message of what they are saying behind the literal meaning. There's some messages that are conveyed by other individuals around them that actually have a different meaning. Those social interactions with different cues. Understanding body language could also be difficult for them. And lastly, reduce appreciation of others. Those are terms of when people are returning favors. Individuals on the spectrum might take a while to understand, or they perhaps not understand what social reciprocity is, from returning favors to starting a conversation in a empty classroom. Usually those individuals on the ASD spectrum tend to have difficulties interpreting feelings differently as of how they see people feelings. They might see it differently, how they perceive how someone is feeling. If an old man is in a coffee shop holding a cup of coffee, scrunching up his face, the individual might interpret the old man's expression as crying or about to cry. Indeed, in reality, the old man himself could be about to sneeze, and the end result, the man sneezed. The person on the spectrum assumes the guy was about to cry. And there's another characteristic: they prefer to be alone in a quiet social surrounding, or being alone in general, exploring their environment. People with ASD prefer to be alone because they enjoy exploring their environment and getting to know things with relationship with objects, exploring features of the room, and simply walking around, seeing how everybody is doing while the individual is in their world. They're in their own world, interpreting something in a different light. And another thing they prefer is a quiet environment, where individuals with ASD typically thrive in quiet environments because the environment eliminates harsh stimuli and also enables them to work effectively, especially in school settings. Quiet room has less to no stimuli when it comes to working on schoolwork for elementary kids on the spectrum. Those individuals also have difficulties with communicating. They might perceive what words are being said in a different manner than what it is initially told to be. For example, the person might say, the other party might tell the individual a general message. The individual might perceive the message as something different, such as underlying elements, underlying meanings that could be easily overlook for someone on the spectrum. They might not be able to catch that. And when they communicate, how their thought process works is very different. They might interpret things differently and say what they said is not necessarily appropriate for the conversation. They're saying what they're interpreting in their mind. They often show little to no eye contact. Some individual on the spectrum might show little to no eye contact when having conversation with individuals on the other side. Some individuals might have abnormal eye contact. Those set of symptoms includes no babbling. The baby might appear not to hear. For example, when his name is being called, the baby might not respond to his name. May prefer objects over people. For instance, when mom hands the infant a teddy bear, the teddy bear is the central interest of the child. Improvement in language throughout their milestones later in development, they will lose those skills and the language will suddenly decline. Repetitive motor movement where the individual might flap their hands or shakes their head in different ways, and the repetitive motor movement is not limited to moving their head, their hands. They might move their body in different ways. The autism spectrum is a spectrum with 3 different functions, and those functions determines the individual's function. So let's look at level 1. Those individuals require support. They're fairly independent, and they have some repetitive behaviors if they don't have the sufficient support. Those individuals have issues with social reciprocity, and they might have difficulties starting or even maintaining conversations with peers. And those individuals have some degree of difficulties with planning, organizing, or organizing tasks, which could affect the individual's independence. Level 2 is where the individual requires substantial support. Those individuals are required some level of support where compared to the first level, they don't require as much support. The second level, they have some difficulties with independence and they have restricted interests. They might just talk about stuff that appeals to them. They might need assistance changing subjects. And those individuals require slightly more support in different functions of their life. The third level, which is the individual requires very substantial support, where the individual have issues with spontaneous activities. They strongly prefer activities that are structured, and they have issues with communicating, which is significant issues. They require a lot of support in different functions of their life. The individual might fixate on objects. As of 0 to 12 months of age, the individual has interest in the object from 12 months to 2 years old, where they start to display self-injurious behaviors, where the individual, for example, when they're upset, they might bite their hand harder than usual and their hand starts to bleed. Or when an individual is upset, they might bump their head on the wall and they might accidentally hurt themselves during times of distress and emotional outbursts. Difficulties managing emotions are quite common among those age group. Those individuals have trouble managing their emotions when they get upset, whereas they don't have many ways to cope. 56% of kids are diagnosed at age 6. They receive their diagnosis by that age, and 90% of the children who are age 12 receive their diagnosis by that age. And individuals who are female are diagnosed 20% of the population versus the male population. 80% of the males are diagnosed with ASD. The theories suggest that there are many possible factors that include genetics, infection, metabolics, and neurology, and including someone's immune system involved with the influences of nature. An environmental factor adding to a natural factor causes a disruption in the brain. Both this factor causes disruption in the brain function, and that causes autism spectrum disorder. Interventions for ASD include video modeling, visual scheduling, and applied behavioral analysis, which is ABA. Visual scheduling is where the individual print out pictures of actual images of the activities they wish to participate in, and they arrange the activity in order in a schedule, and they incorporate those pictures. Visual scheduling eases transitional anxiety and lets the individual know what to expect next. Video modeling is where the individual participates in trying to learn a skill, and the skill is demonstrated in a videotape. In the video, a person without ASD performs the skill, and in return, the individual with ASD are recorded through a recording system while they're performing the skill themselves. And after, they're encouraged to look into their recordings and see if there's anything they are improving on. This helps the individual to develop important life skills through social interaction and through peer modeling. And also, this is a way for individuals to learn skills through socialization. Applied behavior analysis is a therapy where the individual develops skills through different therapeutic programs. And the therapy is to program different skills and how the individual prefer to apply them. And important skills, for example, such as how to put on clothes and how to react to unpleasant stimuli. In conclusion, individuals on the autism spectrum disorder has their own ways of navigating the world and how they respond to stimuli and how they respond to social situations and social interactions. Those individuals have their own ways of communicating